Thank you for joining us. I'm Alex Bell, host of To the Point on ABC 10. And our team knows it is a pivotal period right now for California Democrats. And with the 2026 governor's race looming, 7 top Democratic contenders are trying to prove that they have what it takes to lead the Golden State into its next chapter. So over the next half hour, we are hearing from the candidates and looking at the future of California's Democratic Party as thousands of Democrats just came together in Anaheim for their first convention since Donald Trump won the 2024 presidential election.
Okay, I'm donating right now.
The California Democratic Convention.
Mr. Schiff.
The state convention can do so much. We can pass resolutions, we can support legislation, we can endorse candidates.
Hi there. We're emailing Governor Newsom to ask him to put back
The first major gathering of California's Democrats since the November election.
The implications are pretty simple.
We need to participate in our party convention to make sure that in the next election we have someone reasonable and we can flip the midterm elections.
This spring's convention theme, California Strong. A message California Democratic Party Chairman Rusty Hicks says isn't just a goal, but a reflection of who Californians already are.
And I think despite the challenges and political headwinds, we are California strong. 10 million Democrats, nearly 80% of the state and legislative seats in the state legislature and in Congress. There's a lot to be proud of and a lot to build from.
But more than just party business happened in Anaheim. Delegates in the California Democratic Party, the largest state Democratic Party in the country, shared where they think things stand and what they want to see next.
What I want to see here is something about what direction we're going in, how we were going to defeat Republicans next year, in 2026, and what we need to do to organize and be effective. So far, that message has not reached the ears of people. It's just, yes, we need to do better. So what is the plan? That's what I want to hear. What is the plan?
I feel like we're feeling this sense of despair, and I think coming out of the election, there's this sense of everything's doom and gloom. So I want to hear more hope, but I want to hear real tangible things on how we're going to accomplish this change and how we are going to take things back.
Delegates are also looking at who is ready to lead California.
This time we have a woman governor. Newsom has not been leading us. He's been more concerned about running for president, so he's doing all kinds of weird stuff right now. Things that are not in the best interests of California.
The top Democrat in the state, Governor Gavin Newsom, was noticeably missing at the convention this year.
Everyone has their own life to live, and we listen and we don't judge.
But not everyone felt the same.
I was surprised that he's not here. I think that if he wanted to garner support from the California Democratic Party, or if he wanted to encourage the party, he would be here in some fashion, virtually, in person. There are a lot of different ways to take part, and so I think that his absence is notable.
We heard that Governor Gavin Newsom is not going to be here. What are your thoughts on him not attending?
Sounds like it's a question for him.
But I know that, the California Democratic Party has, strongly supported him. I guess, what do you think it says to voters in California that he isn't here?
Well, I think it's a reminder that there are 10 million California Democrats in this state, that this is an incredibly diverse party, and there are a lot of important voices in this party. And we're going to hear from many of them over the course of the next couple days.
Former Vice President Kamala Harris made a video appearance at the convention.
And proving that our fight to advance freedom and justice must continue.
But stopped short of answering the big question on many minds, whether she plans to run for governor. Harris's former running mate headlined the convention, talking about their November loss.
But somewhere we strayed from our North Star. Right here, right now, Trump and the Republicans are going to screw stuff up enough with the working class. We're going to have an opportunity to be their champions.
Governor of Minnesota Tim Walz and Senators Cory Booker and Adam Schiff all spoke, focusing on the 2026 election and fighting back against President Donald Trump's administration.
When they want to shut down Social Security offices for our seniors, we say, hell no. When they want to cut services to our veterans, do we let them? Hell no.
Chairman Hicks doubling down on the same message. And going into the new year, would you say that there are one or two really main focuses this year?
Well, certainly the fight for 2026 doesn't start in 2026. It starts right here, right now. And I think we have to do two things. We have to ensure that we push back and fight back against what we're seeing out of Washington, D.C. California is right in the firing line when it comes to the actions of the Trump administration. So we have to both protect vulnerable communities and ensure that we're organizing for the political fights ahead. And I think we're well positioned to do both.
The 2024 elections, what do you think the outcome of that election really said about where voters, or specifically Democratic voters, are right now?
You know, we have to reflect on and reckon with what happened in 2024. I think we certainly have a lot to be proud of, especially here in California. While we didn't win the national, the top of the ticket race for the White House, California bucked the trend, pushed back against some tough political headwinds to be able to win 6 of 8 congressional seats, flip 3 seats from red to blue, move us that much closer to being able to retake the House of Representatives in 2026. And so certainly we've got to reckon with some of the turnout challenges in key communities and assess what that means for us headed into a tough election cycle in 18 months.
Does the party have their eye on any candidate for governor that they're going to back this year or next year?
It was a deep bench, a lot of talent in the Democratic Party. And so, you know, I expect there to be a long conversation over the course of the next 18 months about what the next vision, the next chapter, the next era for California really looks like. But I expect it to be led by a Democrat. One of California voters' biggest decisions next year will be choosing a new governor. High-profile Democrats are jumping in to claim California's top job as Governor Gavin Newsom terms out of office. The field is crowded, and we know the stakes are high. But with big names jumping in and rumors of Kamala Harris possibly running, the question remains: who will take charge in what's shaping up to be one of the most watched political battles in the country? Now, we sat down with 7 of the top Democratic candidates to ask, what's the biggest issue facing Californians? What would be their top priority if they were to be elected? And if Kamala Harris does jump in, would they stay in the race? We put the 7 candidates' names in a hat and drew them at random order. So first up is Toni Thurmond. Now, Thurmond didn't grow up with wealth or influence. Shaped by loss and poverty, he found hope through public education and mentors who believed in him. That path inspired a lifelong mission to help young people, a mission he carried straight into public office as California State Superintendent of Public Instruction and in the California State Assembly. Now he's running for governor with a very clear purpose: to ensure every Californian has the same shot that he was given. What do you think is really plaguing Californians right now? What issue do you think they care about the most? And if you were to be elected, how would you plan to address it?
I think it's affordability. We have 40% of the folks who are homeless and unhoused in this state are elderly Californians, and 240,000 homeless students in our state. And so when you think about the lack of affordability, how the American dream of owning a home is slipping away from most Americans, we are at a inflection point in California where we have to figure out we can't rest on our laurels, and we have to get back to basics and to figure out ways to help everyday Californians right now who are just worried about how to pay their rent, how to pay their groceries, how to pay their gas.
What would be your top 3 priorities your first year in office if you were to be elected?
I think that they have to be addressing homelessness, working on affordable housing, and working to help Californians be able to earn more and to have great employment that provides a great wage. I've already started work on a program to build affordable housing in the state, a plan that can build 2 million units by the year 2030. We have a supply problem in California, and the lack of supply has contributed to the high cost of housing. It turns out that school districts in every county in our state have surplus property. There are 75,000 acres of land that is ready right now for housing development. And so I've introduced legislation that would provide some funding to school districts for the pre-development of housing on that surplus property, and to get them some technical assistance on how to do it. And if those districts were to build just a dozen units on average on that property, we'd get to 2.3 million units by the year 2030. And so I've rolled this plan out. We're working with our school districts to help them. And so, you know, my campaign has ideas, but we also have solutions that we're working on now. I'm not waiting until the outcome of the election. We're working on these issues now.
If former Vice President Kamala Harris decides to enter the race, will you still run?
You know, there's been a lot of speculation about what the vice president is going to do, and I've not heard from her. She's a friend and a mentor. I've supported her twice when she's run for president. She's someone that I look up to and have great respect for. You know, until I hear from her, I'm full speed ahead in this campaign.
The daughter of Chinese immigrants, Betty Yee got her start managing her family's dry cleaning business finances at just 8 years old. In her nearly 40 years of public service, she's managed California's finances as state controller, serving terms on the State Board of Equalization and as former vice chair of the California Democratic Party. She's running for governor with a focus on accountability, affordability, and prosperity. What do you think is the biggest issue Californians are worried about right now, and what would you do to address it?
The biggest issue facing California right now, hands down, is housing affordability. And housing affordability for themselves and their families, but also as they look at the growing numbers of people who are homeless in California. It's really one of the things that I think I have seen become more of an issue for employers in California as well. So people always talk about the high tax rates in California, but even beyond the tax rates, because I think businesses understand that paying taxes is about the privilege of doing business in California. But when they don't know where their employees are going to live, when they don't have a sense that you know, when they can hire just young talent out of colleges and universities, that they're going to have a stable workforce, that's a concern. That's a concern. And so that is really the top issue that I have heard. There are many others, but as tied to the economy, but this is the main driver because it's so personal. It's so personal.
And what would be your top 3 priorities your first year in office if you were to be elected?
But my 3 main issues really are in the affordability bucket, if you will. Housing, healthcare, and electricity bills. Our electricity bills keep increasing, and yet people really are feeling it in their pocketbook, and likely will be a measure of just whether our cost of living is going to be something that is sustainable or not. And I do want to mention the climate crisis because, as you know, there's no part of the state that is spared from the effects of climate change now. Whether it's the wildfires we've just experienced in Southern California, even in other parts of the state, whether it's extreme weather events and extreme heat, sea level rise. We're seeing, some coastal communities are going to be facing that in real time in the near future. So all of that, and I mention that because in so many ways, the next governor is going to have to be adept at looking at both solving issues in the short term as well as the long term, right? And with finite resources. Because of my finance background, I always talk about how we need to really assume that we have finite resources because what we have to work with today, may not be there tomorrow, or may be constrained, tomorrow. And a good example of that is just what we're bracing ourselves for with respect to federal funding cuts.
If Vice President Kamala Harris decides to enter the race, will you still run?
I will.
After the 2016 election, former Congresswoman Katie Porter stepped into politics for the first time and made history by flipping a longtime Republican district and serving 3 terms in Congress. Known for holding powerful interests accountable, Porter passed laws to cut health care costs, protect consumers, and support first responders. Now teaching at UC Irvine Law, she's preparing the next generation and making her case to lead California as its next governor. What do you think is the biggest issue facing Californians right now, and how would you work to address it?
Californians are really worried about cost. And look, I see this in my own life. The biggest part of my budget's the biggest part of most people's budget. It's housing. And so how can we lower the cost of building in California so we can build more homes? And we need a lot of kinds of housing. We need more rental housing. We need more housing for students on our campuses. We need more housing for seniors as they age in California. So we know that it takes longer to build housing in California than anywhere else, and time is money, as the saying goes. Those delays drive up the cost. So there's exciting bills in the legislature right now, but there will be more to do, even if those pass, to make sure that we can build homes for future Californians.
If elected, what would be your top 3 priorities your first year in office?
Well, definitely one of them is doing some oversight work of government. I drive a minivan. I have 3 kids, and my minivan license plate is OVRSITE, oversight. I was on the House Oversight Committee in Congress, and so when I talk about oversight, what I mean is closing the gap between what government's supposed to do and what's really happening. So if it says call this number to get help with your taxes, somebody should pick up the phone. So we need to start moving forward on housing, along with that homelessness prevention. So we're putting a lot of money right now into helping people who are on the streets get into permanent supportive housing. What we need to be doing is stopping people from becoming homeless in the first place, because it's very, very expensive to help someone once they're in that situation. And then my third priority, childcare. Every economist, right and left, across the ideological spectrum, will tell us one of the best things that we can do for our economy to be competitive globally, one of the best things California can do to sort of turbocharge young families choosing to come here and raise their kids here, is make childcare affordable.
If Vice President Kamala Harris decides to enter the race, will you still run?
So I'm going to make that decision when the time comes. Obviously, for me, these last several months have been incredibly valuable. I think there's a real energy and a real hunger. People are worried about what Trump's doing. They're worried about some of the challenges California is facing. There are headwinds for our state coming from Washington, obviously. And so I'm really glad I've had this time. It's time I've spent listening and learning. I'm here at the Democratic Party convention thinking with people about how do we organize to win up and down the ballot? How do we develop policies that really help people?
Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis made history as the first woman elected Lieutenant Governor of California. A former U.S. ambassador under former President Obama, Kounalakis has built a record of expanding access to higher education, championing women's rights, and advancing climate leadership. What do you think is the biggest issue really plaguing Californians right now? And if you were to be elected, what would you do to address it?
The main issue plaguing us so far is what Donald Trump is doing to the country and doing to our state. The trade war, which is driving up prices through the tariffs, potentially pulling back Medicaid, which is Medi-Cal in California, going after our universities, cutting grants for science. We are under a major assault right now by the federal government. But we're not just about dealing with that assault, and that's what we're doing here at the Democratic Party, is figuring out how are we going to stop him? How are we going to take back the House of Representatives in 26? How are we going to use the courts to be able to push back? But Democrats also have to be about what problems we're going to solve. And so to answer that question, it is clear that the biggest challenge that we have is the affordability crisis. But nothing drives the affordability crisis more than the cost of housing. Your rent check or your mortgage check, those are going to eat up the biggest portion of your monthly budget. And the answer is we need to build the water infrastructure, the roadway infrastructure, the clean energy infrastructure, the broadband and communications infrastructure. And that is where the state comes in. So what I hope to do is lead the effort to build, the next phase of California's major backbone infrastructure, in order that when we do these things to make it easier to build housing, you actually have the services for all that housing.
If elected, what would be your top 3 priorities your first year in office?
My first year in office, we would prioritize the construction of infrastructure, number 1. Whatever is going to be done in the next 2 years, hopefully will help make it easier to build housing, but we will continue to build on the current governor's work to be able to make it more efficient and streamlined to build housing. And, I'm very proud of what we have done for education. Education is from cradle to career. And a big part of my work as lieutenant governor has been making higher education accessible and affordable. They're becoming the welders who are going to help build all that infrastructure that I talked about. They're the nurses and the healthcare workers. So number 3 for me is investing in education.
Javier Becerra was born and raised right here in Sacramento. He served as California's Attorney General, spent 12 terms representing the state in Congress, and made history as the first Latino to lead the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Now, as he eyes the governor's office, Becerra says California is at a crossroads, and he's ready to build, protect, and deliver for the state that he's always called home.
What do you think is the biggest issue that Californians are facing right now, and what would you do to address it?
The affordability crisis is probably the most present problem, challenge that we face as a state. When you can't afford to live close to where you work, when it's getting tough to buy a dozen eggs, when with all this tariff tax craziness, it's unclear what a price of a car will be, it becomes really difficult to know how you budget. And for people who are trying to plan for their kids' education, for people who are trying to buy that first home, it becomes really difficult. So that affordability crisis is probably foremost in people's minds. But certainly we have to make sure that we're building the homes that people need so they can find a decent place to live.
If you are elected governor, what would be your first 3 top priorities, and how would you plan to address them?
Well, housing has to be one of those top priorities. I do believe that if we can solve this housing crunch that we're in, people will have that peace of mind that they need to be able to then go beyond, plan for their kids' college education, prepare for their retirement. So without a doubt, the affordability crisis in housing first and foremost. Second, I do think we have to deal with energy. We have to figure out how we're going to be able to provide the energy that we all need. We want to continue to have it be as clean energy as possible, but we also want to make sure that we don't price those working class families out of the ability to buy a home, to be able to send their kids to college. And so we have to make sure that we are ensuring that everyone gets to participate. I think that we will build out our energy sources well, transition from more fossil burning fuels into the clean energy fuels that we need to have in California, but we're going to do it in a pace that makes sure that working families can come along. And then finally, I think we have to get back to the business of building, whether it's building better health care or building better educational programming. We have to do the things that people expect to have in front of them so they can succeed in life and let their kids then advance when they're ready to go on to become productive Americans.
If Vice President Kamala Harris decides to enter the race, will you still run?
Yeah, to me it makes no difference who's in the race. I took time to think about this, and the most important people that I spoke to, my wife, my family, a close circle of friends, I took all those things into account. I'm in this race till the very end.
Former Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa is a former labor leader and led the California State Assembly. After an unsuccessful bid for governor back in 2018, he's making another run for 2026, reintroducing himself as a proven problem solver who works across the aisle.
But what do you think is the #1 concern for Californians right now, and how would you plan to address it?
So I think the cost of living, I think the cost of housing, and the fact that we haven't increased our supply, whether it's market rate, whether it's affordable or housing for homeless. I think we need a governor that's going to challenge the fact that we've spent tens of billions of dollars in homelessness. And the question is, here in Sacramento, in San Francisco, in San Jose, LA, and San Diego, where's it gone? I think we have a right to ask those questions. Gavin Newsom made me his infrastructure advisor because I built in Los Angeles. I made the crane the official bird of the city. You saw it downtown. You saw it with LA Live. We need a governor that's going to roll up his sleeves and say, it's time to build again. Housing, infrastructure, particularly energy infrastructure.
What would be your top 3 priorities, your first year in office? What would you really focus on?
You know, we love to brag about the fact that we're the 4th largest economy in the world. What we don't say is we have the highest cost of living, and so we have the highest effective poverty rate. So first of all, the governor's got job number 1 is to balance a budget, to make sure that we're not spending more than we have. Job number 2 is to build infrastructure, to build the housing, the energy infrastructure. We not only can't put it on the best way not to put it on the backs of the middle class and working people is to have an all-of-the-above strategy. We're going to have gasoline-powered cars, and we're going to use gasoline and oil for a long time. We're not going to be done by 2035. So let's acknowledge that. So focus on housing, focus on homelessness, and focus on safety. I've always said, whether you're mayor or governor, balancing the budget, safety, protecting your citizens, residents, that's the #1 job of a governor.
If former Vice President Kamala Harris does decide to enter the race, will you still run?
Absolutely. I've made that clear. In fact, I've said, Kamala, if you're going to run, get in. You know, it's time. People want us to talk about what we're going to do going forward. And I will stay in this race until the end, because I believe that we need a course correction in this state. We need change in this state.
Toni Atkins says that she knows what it's like to struggle. As a child with free school breakfast and donated glasses, that experience shaped her lifelong mission to serve others and protect vulnerable communities, fighting for dignity and opportunity for all. She became the first woman and openly LGBTQ+ person to lead both houses of California's legislature. Now she's running for governor to lead California forward with the same grit that's guided her from the very beginning.
What do you think is the biggest issue really plaguing Californians right now? And if elected, what would you do to address it?
I think housing is the #1 issue. It doesn't just affect you and me personally, individually, it affects the California economy. If people can't stay here, that affects who we are. We may be the 4th largest economy in the world, but if people don't feel it, then we got to address that. I ran for the assembly because I wanted to work on housing. I came out of local government, had worked on housing at the local level in San Diego, built thousands and thousands of units of housing, affordable and market rate. In California, when I got to the legislature, nobody was talking about housing. It took at least 5 years, about a decade ago. Thanks to the media, frankly, the crisis was front page news. And so legislators began to really address it. And I think in this last decade, we've made significant movement on cutting red tape, putting money into the development, figuring out where we need to build so that we have infrastructure. So you see, that's not simple. And had we been doing this for the last 30 years, we would have more housing. So it's going to take not 1 year, not 2 years, not 1 term as governor, not 2 terms. We need to stay focused and intentional about building housing. And so that's why I say this is one of my #1 priorities.
If elected, what would be your top 3 priorities your first year in office?
Well, it's going to be housing, absolutely. And I would also add healthcare to that. I also grew up without healthcare. So I know the impact of not having access to real healthcare. We've done a lot to expand healthcare in California, implemented the Affordable Care Act, but healthcare is still uneven and hard to access. So I think that has to be a priority. If you have housing and healthcare, those are just the 2 biggest issues when it comes to what you can afford. So those are my 2 biggest priorities. I would also say, in light of everything going on in Washington, D.C. and the chaos, my priority has now become protecting vulnerable communities.
And if Vice President Kamala Harris decides to enter the race, will you still run?
Well, I'm focused on becoming the next governor. That is the job I want. That is the work I want to do. So I'm in this. I want to be the next governor, and I look forward.
Thank you so much for joining us as we begin to cover this pivotal period in California politics. And if you do want to hear more from the candidates, make sure you head over to our ABC 10 YouTube page. I'm Alex Bell. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.